Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this session focusing on agriculture and food security. My name is Gabriel Bock, and I'm a senior agriculture and food security specialist in the Division of Mitigation and Adaptation at the Green Climate Fund. Our apologies for the delay. We were trying to get more people in the room and getting the logistics ready. And here we are now ready to start this session, which will run over the next 90 minutes. And we're going to try throughout these 90 minutes to think about how programming and investment in agriculture and food security has been done so far at the GCF, and how we can do it better, more at scale, and with more impact moving forward. As you well know, since you are here in the room, agriculture is a very important sector. We've seen it yesterday also in some of the polls that we have run through the different session. Actually, at one point when we discussed about priorities, the nexus of food, water, and energy came as the most important programmatic priority for the GCF2. And we look forward to discussing with you how we can do this better together with you and together with our partners for the remainder of GCF1 and for the upcoming GCF2 replenishment cycle. Today's session, as I already hinted, has a threefold objective. First and foremost, we will provide, on behalf of the Secretariat, an overview of the programming directions and the sectoral guide for agriculture and food security. We will be showcasing, with the support of our panelists, 3 examples of GCF projects in which GCF have invested in the agriculture and food security space. And we will be discussing about the way forward, including some of the programmatic priorities that we have identified for GCF2. Before I start with my presentation in more detail, I'd like to thank our panelists for today. We are joined on stage in the order in which they are seated by Benedict Libanda, the CEO of the Namibia Environmental Investment Fund, by Jolene Mori, the task manager for SUB-20, one of the projects implemented by the Micronesia Conservation Trust, and by Tamer, the managing director of the Acumen Resilient Agricultural Fund, and by our colleague Mark, who is also an agriculture and food security specialist, part of our team. Our agriculture and food security team is one of the largest in the Secretariat. We are also, Mark and I, joined by our colleague Kunduz Masilkanova, which is covering mostly Asia and the Pacific. And without further ado, I'd like to give you a quick introduction on the way we've programmed and we are planning to continue programming in line with our sectoral guide in the agriculture and food security space. If I could have the slides on. Perfect. Thank you so much. Perfect. So our programming in agriculture and food security is rooted in the current challenges of the agriculture sector and in the priorities identified by the countries. And we all know that agriculture is central to food security and rural development, and it supports the livelihoods of a vast majority of the world's rural population. Yet, agriculture and food security are facing the challenges of increasing demand for quality food while reducing the sector's environmental footprint, which we also know it's extremely important, especially dominated by rice production and livestock production. At the same time, we're dealing with a growing population that puts increasing pressure on land and food. So, and there is also an increased changing of diets, especially from middle-income countries. So the demand for agricultural products will require at least a 16% increase by 2050. And the key question that we need to answer together is how can we deliver that while adapting to climate change and mitigating some of the impacts. We've seen in the latest IPCC reports that the pace at which climate change is delivering its risks and impacts is affecting agricultural sector very, very fast, especially in the most developed, the most needy countries and in developing countries. And we will see increasingly a decrease of the areas that are suitable for agricultural production through a mix of factors that will have to do with soil acidification, loss of fertility, and increasing occurrence of pests and limited water availability in the future. And all of this is happening in a context in which we have an increasing increasing numbers of food insecure people, and in which conflicts like the one that we are facing right now in Ukraine is disrupting food supply chains. Sorry, I want to be too far. Yeah. In addition to our bottom-up approach of identifying priorities in the food and agriculture space, our programming is also anchored in some of the priority topics and approaches that are being promoted at global level. As you are well aware, last year we experienced the organization of the first UN Food System Summit, where around 5 action tracks, a broad range of governments and organizations discussed about the transformation that's required for food systems worldwide. As a follow-up to the summit of last year, a number of coalitions and hubs are emerging in order to guide the policy priorities and the investments in the transformation of food systems around the world, and we are part of some of those initiatives. In parallel, at the last COP, we've seen two major initiatives, global initiatives with an impact on the agricultural sector. The Global Methane Pledge, where over 100 countries committed to at least 30% reduction by 2030 of methane emissions. And this is particularly relevant for agriculture because livestock and irrigated rice production are two major emitters of methane. In parallel, we've seen a pledge on ending deforestation by 2030, and my colleagues working on forestry are also trying to address that from the forestry side. In this context, over 141 countries pledged to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by 2030. And we will see increasing market regulation, especially from developed countries, for commodities that are often associated with deforestation. And we're trying to guide some of our investments to reverse these negative trends. I've already alluded that the latest IPCC assessments continue to alert us at the pace in which climate change will affect agricultural production. And as a result, agriculture is expected to continue to be high on the agenda at COP27 and even COP28, for which the preparations have started. So our programming in the sector is meeting the intersection of these global processes and the country needs that are continuing to emerge. And we have structured our intervention in the sector through our sectoral guidance along 3 paradigm shifting pathways. Unfortunately, the screen is a bit small, but you have the link to the full sector guide there, and I will walk you through what we're trying to propose in the agricultural space. So the 3 paradigm shifting pathways are the first one on promoting resilient agroecology, the second one on facilitating climate-informed advisory and risk management services, and the third one on reconfiguring food systems. And our interventions are structured in 4 pillars. A first pillar on transformational planning and programming, a second one on catalyzing climate innovation, a third one on mobilizing finance at scale, and a fourth one on building coalition and knowledge to scale up success. With a bit more detail under the first pathway on promoting resilient agroecology, we are aiming to work with countries and with our access entities to promote and support adaptation and mitigation efforts while seeking to promote the agroecological conditions that reduce climate shocks on agricultural productivity. And the type of interventions that we have here are some that you're very familiar with on promoting improved and climate resilient seeds, on promoting the diversification of crop varieties and breeds, on diversifying in general rural livelihoods away from monocropping to including different crops, including the more climate resilient ones, and engaging in aquaculture and livestock activities where possible. Some of the techniques that we've been promoting for our projects here and we want to continue promoting include landscape approaches, so working at a broader territorial level, water and soil management, integrated pest management, and agroforestry, as well as soil irrigation and micro pumping and micro irrigation. Under the pathway 2, facilitating climate-informed advisory and risk management services, we are working across a broad of services that are aiming to support agricultural production in a resilient and sustainable way, including climate information and early warning systems, particularly targeting agricultural production and outreach to rural populations, digital agricultural advisory and extension in order to reach the necessary scale of outreach, as well as access to finance through increased financial literacy, microfinancing, innovative financial instruments, and lastly, also insurance. That's something that we want to keenly see more integrated in our agriculture and food security projects moving forward. Last but not least, the reconfiguring food systems pathway is the one where we've done currently least work, and we're going to continue leading to that. This is where we're trying to work at the systemic level to change how food is produced, stored, transported, sold, and consumed in order to avoid, among other things, and you will hear from my colleague Mark, reduce food loss and waste, change diets, and in generally make sure that food is available to populations in the necessary quality, contributes to nutrition, but in a sustainable and resilient way. Just to give you an overall overview of what we've done so far in the agricultural space, these numbers are changing all the time. So if you see any discrepancy to what you've heard in other sessions, it's a minor one. We've had 68 GCF approved projects that are targeting specifically agriculture and food security. The footprint on agriculture and food security has been broader than this because agriculture and food security are part of other projects as well, but these are the ones that are specifically in this sector. Most of them have been cross-cutting, which is something that we want to continue doing. I think we should not decouple mitigation and adaptation in our efforts to work on the agricultural sector. There's been a broad geographical coverage. At least 24 LDCs have been targeted so far, 12 seeds, as well as 33 African countries have benefited from agricultural investments to date. And the portfolio of this project is roughly 1.1 billion. There was a poll on Whova for this session. Most of you underestimated the amount that we've done so far in the agricultural space. So we're at about 10% of our portfolio to date, and we have quite a large pipeline that will allow us for the remainder of GCF1 and the beginning of GCF2 continuing the pace and even accelerating the pace of delivery for agriculture and food security. Yet what we've seen so far in GCF1 is an insufficient participation of the private sector. The vast majority of these projects have been delivered for public financing window, which has delivered important results. But as we will see throughout the conversations today, there's a need to scale up the pace and the volume of finance that goes into adaptation for agriculture. And one of the way of doing that is in partnership with the private sector, which will need the deployment of GCF finances for technical assistance, de-risking, and leveraging additional resources from private sector investors. There's as well a need for more programmatic approaches, moving away from the rather small and limited projects that we've done so far in GCF1 in order to be able to deliver to the countries much faster and more at scale our support. And I will stop here, and I would like to move to the session in which we will be showcasing some of the examples of GCF investments that took place up to this moment. Some of the projects are well under implementation. Some are at the beginning of implementation. And to kickstart, I'd like to invite Benedict Libamba, the CEO of Namibia's Environmental Investment Fund, to present some of the experiences that Namibia had with GCF investments in agriculture. Namibia has been one of the African countries that benefited earliest from GCF support, and the Namibia Environmental Investment Fund is a direct access entity. And Benedict will share with you how the experience of a DAE really took place. Without further ado, over to you, Benedict. Please join me on stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. While we're waiting for the slides to load, I'm Benedict Libamba, as it has been alluded to. I'm the CEO of the Environmental Investment Fund of Namibia. Actually, for those who doesn't know Namibia very well, Namibia is a small populated country. We are about 2.5 million people in the country. So the country is relatively big to the population at 825,000 square kilometers. That makes us the second least densely populated country in the world, behind Mongolia. Coming back to the EIF and our GCF journey, we got accredited in 2016, one of the first 21 entities to be accredited by the GCF as a direct access entity. And since then, we have had experiences in implementing 4 projects under the GCF portfolio. And those projects range from the enhanced direct access, which is EDA. We are one of the first 2 entities to access that window. We're the first one to access the simplified approval process facility of the GCF, as well as experience with the regular financing window of the GCF. So what I will present is the experiences and lessons that we have learned throughout this journey. 2 of those projects are closing in the next 4 months. One is closing next month, and we've started programming for the next cycle of our GCF funding. Again, just to touch on Namibia, we are a hyper-arid country, the driest country in sub-Saharan Africa. 90% of the land is not suitable for conventional agriculture, and we have to use resilience mechanism and approaches to have a very competitive land use for agriculture, and also to improve livelihoods and food security. So what we've done so far under the agricultural resilience, within those 4 projects that are ongoing, aggregated on its impact, we have focused on climate resilient technologies or smart technologies, where we're using a lot of solar powered systems as inputs to agricultural production. This is mainly in rural areas that are far away from grid connections, and supporting small scale farmers and improving their resiliencies. We've also tested fodder production through hydroponic systems. If you now connect that, because grazing is a huge problem huge challenge in an arid environment. There's a lot of overgrazing, and when you look at it, you need to supplement it with some form of fodder production systems. So we have tested those technologies on the ground. And drought tolerant seeds, because of the aridity, we need seeds and that mature areas that have got a faster turnaround in terms of early harvesting. Then small stock revolving facilities. This is now small livestock breeding schemes that are resilient. So we're talking about the sheep, the Karakou sheep that is resilient to local conditions and environmental conditions. Then we've also tested the crop insurance scheme, where we've used satellite-based crop insurance systems, which also cover with index systems and so forth, just to test how that would be mainstream and taken up by the private sector, as well as backed up by the by the government and some reinsurance industries. Okay, so the numbers might seem to be very low, but it talks to the population of the country. About 200,000 people so far benefited from the are benefiting directly and indirectly from this intervention. Yeah. So just to give you the scale of hectarage that we've covered, under this hard condition, is that we've covered about 54,000 hectares of land, mainly supporting rain-fed production systems under conservation agriculture. Conservation agriculture suits very well in an arid ecosystem where minimum tillage is promoted, so that the moisture is retained in the soil and supports the prolonged growth of the crop. So that has really worked well in the country, and it's now taken up by the Ministry of Agriculture, mainstream supported and budgeted for. Then, because of the aridities, we've used a lot of hydroponic systems. Technology really works very well in lower water yield areas, and it has really proved to be highly successful on the ground. Yeah, just to show you some of the pictures coming from rural areas in terms of tonnage that we've done under the implementation of this project, is that about 310 tons of cereals and horticulture products has been produced so far. And these are production that is taking place at areas that never produced cereals. They were more livestock based and rangeland based areas, and this has diversified their livelihoods as well as improved their capacity to cope with the challenges of climate change. And on top of that, it has diversified livelihood of these communities. We are seeing SMEs and income growing from the activities and the intervention supported. Approximately now in US dollars, it's about 3.2 million that we've seen. But that is so conservative figures in terms of income generation at community level. And if you look at it, most of these communities had little means of earning income before the GCF interventions. So it's extremely important to note that again, as an arid areas, much of our water sources is underground. Of course, when it rains, there's a lot of water capturing that goes in our aquifers. There's a lot of aquifers there, but the on the ground water reservoirs are almost non-available. So most water source in the country is underground. So what we've done is with this funding, we have supported boreholes, drillings, and rehabilitation, or retrofitted them with solar systems. About 230 boreholes across the country, and mainly community ones. And this yields fresh water that is at the quality of consumables by households, as well as they use this water for livestock, as well as small-scale irrigation systems. So again, 123 small-scale farmers, mainly rural areas, are having benefited from this intervention because of water scarcity, water access. Which has been a big challenge. If you look at it previously, before that, the boreholes that were there used diesel generators. So some of the communities, because of distances, they will travel for 200 kilometers every month to buy a 50-liter diesel. And with these solar panels and solar system, renewable systems, communities now are saving time to travel, are saving money to use for diesel, and it's extremely so efficient in the farming systems and the environment. So most importantly is women empowerment. So what we've done because of gender sensitivities of this project, as well as the historical gender imbalances in terms of access to natural resources, we deliberately targeted women as the core beneficiaries of these activities. So when it comes to capacity building, training, we've reached out to about 1,728 females. These are female small-scale farmers in rural areas. One will say, what is 5 female tractor drivers? The role of drivers in Namibia has been for years given to males only, and these were the first female to drive tractors, to plow, and when they were awarded with the license, they were even on the front page of the newspapers. That's how excited it was, because it was first female drivers to operate, government tractors for conservation agriculture, plowing services, etc. So we expect that number to grow up substantial within the next few years. So that is groundbreaking in our case. Then I've spoke about small scale breeding schemes for livestock that's adaptable to local conditions. And this about almost 2,000 of that, if you round it off, has been given to female-headed households. So how the small scale revolving livestock facilities work is that after a beneficiary receives 21 goats or sheep, in 2 years' time, we'll bring back those goats. Another beneficiary receives them. It becomes, revolving, and more beneficiaries comes on board. So it's extremely working very well because of the ownership that is taken by these communities. Hydroponic fodder production, very, very simple technologies that we're implementing. Two systems, for example, will feed about 3,000 sheep a day. And in a country where fodder, rangeland, and overgrazing and desertification is taking its toll, this is an extremely good adaptation measure in terms of improving and safeguarding livelihoods in the region. Just to give 5,600 kg of fodder production daily, you harvest on a daily basis to feed those animals. And also the good thing about this system is solar powered. It uses 90% less water as compared if you were to plant lucerne for production and for irrigation. So that one is barley that we are planting for livestock production. Then value chains, you understand, because the distances are very far apart because of the vastness of the country. So the shelf life of products is very short. They need to go to the market. So what we've done is to find how can we prolong these products and add values. So that's where women groups have been doing chili production, canning, bottling, etc. What you see there, the guy in the cape there, that's our minister in the head. That's our minister of agriculture. So inspecting these products, and what's good is that about 5 supermarkets are buying these products from these farmers. I'm finishing now. I need to be very constructive on this last slide. I will be very constructive. So this is the message to take home and to the GCF. we're seeing that from a policy perspective, this intervention have really guided how future policy at national levels are designed and how they integrate climate resilience and agriculture within the food security spectrum. So, for example, the climate insurance scheme has been now part of the national priority programs under the national development initiatives. The revolving scheme for livestock is also now taken over, budgeted for by the government. The technologies to move from diesel-powered boreholes to solar powers is now a policy directive by the ministry that they will not provide those kind of support, and they'll be transitioned to really clean and resilient agricultural system. Then coming from the ERF, as you know, how we've experienced the implementation of this project, we found that it's too costly to implement a micro project in terms of the transactional cost, operational cost, etc. Yeah, this, you can't compare that to a small media scale project. This is because the GCF provide about 5% of the budget on entity fees. But if we look at it, the demand on reporting, the demand on monitoring, the demand on compliance, etc., that becomes little to support the whole project management unit or implementation. And what it does, it undermines the quality of delivery, and it risks the project to be successful. And in our case, we have to use our own resources as ERF to aid up on the project management unit so that we realize the cost. So it would be good for the GCF just to really look at that one, especially for micro projects and see how that affects delivery in a long term. I think, again, we need a programmatic approach in our implementation as a GCF family. What we've noted is that there is desire from the GCF on a programmatic approach, and this, we welcome this as from our experience. Instead of having 4 different projects, that require different reporting and etc. Why can't you put them in a programmatic framework? Then you report once at a time. Now, these 4 different projects of $10 million each have got a project of, coordinator, a PMU, etc. Even the efficiency on delivery, the cost benefits on deliveries, they don't really make sense. And also, if you look at projects are mainly short term. When you look at programmatic, it's very strategic. It can be long term, 10 years, 15 years, and deliver a very strong sustainable output or outcomes in terms of investment. 1 minute I'm left. Okay. And number 4, we need to consider new financing vehicles because there's innovating financial tools are coming on the market, such as blended financing and fit for purpose capital financing. And we would like to explore this in our new programming with the GCF on how we can de-risk private sector capital and also leverage more and cover those unbankable clients, especially in the agricultural sector, by providing guarantees, interest subsidies, etc., etc. So, and then the last one is more on the direct access entity that are already accredited. If there could be a deliberate program that looks at nurturing or coaching direct access entity to migrate from micro, small, etc. I think that would be welcome. What we've seen so far, the GCF is really supporting direct access entity with capacity building, strengthening system, governance, etc. And that is really welcome. But if you look at the trap that we have, how do we progress from micro to small and going up as an entity? So that's a question that we need to look at, and it will be a very sad reality if a direct access entity is not, in operation anymore, which was previously accredited by the GCF. It won't, reflect very well on itself and the GCF at large. But it's extremely important we look at nurturing this entity, find a way of gradually supporting them so that we achieve that transformative results we're looking for, and also that, programmatic approach in terms of delivering results on the ground. Thank you so much. 3 minutes more.
Thank you very much, Benedict. It was really inspiring to see results on the ground from one of the GCF finance projects that have been well underway and almost are completing in implementation next month and in the following 4 months. And it was also great to see some of the lessons learned, and thank you very much for putting that forward for us as food for thought for later during our discussion and Q&A. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Joe to give us a perspective from far away from Namibia, all the way in Micronesia. Please join for your presentation.
Thank you, Gabriel. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jolene Mori. I'm representing Micronesia Conservation Trust. Micronesia Conservation Trust, it's an accredited entity to a project for the Federated States of Micronesia, which is titled Climate Resilient Food Security for Farming Households across the FSM. The executing entities for the project is the FSM government and our College of Micronesia. The FSM is located in the middle of the North Pacific Ocean near Hawaii and Guam, and is one of the most vulnerable places in the world to the impacts of climate change. The FSM asks for distinctive states with different languages, cultures, and geographical features and ecosystems. Similar to other small island developing states, the largest threats include sea level rise, ocean warming, ocean acidification, and deoxygenation, increased floods and droughts. Sorry. I'm so nervous. I'm so sorry. Oh. So this project, the climate problem that this project addresses is the projected increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events due to climate change poses the greatest risk to cash crop and subsistence production in the FSM over the next few decades. Sorry, we don't have this kind of technology back home, so. Okay. Oh, there? Sorry. In addition to the climate change impacts, there is also a complex system of traditional ownership of land, where many parcels of land parcels of land are held by families and clans that may have different fractions, all of whom asset assert interest in the land. This complicates both the use of the land and the recording of tenure and the use of the land. Most land use for agriculture was reported to be freehold land or held with customary titles. As I mentioned earlier, the project is titled Climate Resilient Food Security for farming households across the FSM. Its theme is for health, well-being, food and water security, resilient agriculture. It's targeting 68,200 people, 250 people. And the GCF funds, it is $8.5 million. Total project funds, it's 9.3 million, and it's for a 5-year project. And there are 3 components of the project. The 3 components are establishing and enabling environment for adaptive action and investment. This component includes the development of institutional coordination mechanisms at the national and at the state level. It will also, under this component, we will be establishing farmers associations, as well as improving our agriculture policies by integrating climate change. The second component is enhancing the food security of vulnerable households by introducing climate smart agriculture or CSA practices. So under this component, there will be trainings for the extension agents, and we will be identifying climate smart practices to also train farming households. For component number 3, strengthening climate resilient value chains and market linkages across the agriculture sector. Under this component, the outputs would be developing of new markets for local agriculture, enhanced food processing and preservation, and increasing awareness and consumption of local food. So the innovation under this project, this project is different. Is different than previous initiatives, as it is the first comprehensive national effort to focus on increasing the resilience of FSM most vulnerable communities to food insecurity in the face of climate change. Never been a holistic and integrated approach. There will be a nationwide examination of how the food sector will be affected by climate change to provide an adequate evidence base to inform adoption measures. It is important that this examination consider the links between urban, rural, and neighboring or outer islands. The technologies or practices are being proposed to beneficiaries will be to establishing of nurseries, seed banks, tailored trainings for use of climate smart agriculture practices, food processing, market access, and implementation at all levels. The innovative delivery mechanisms include establishing of institutional coordination mechanism, integrating climate change into food security policies, development of network of state-level farmer associations, development of business model for sustainable financing, which will be utilizing the participatory guarantee system model. The project implementation adapted to climate change, climate problem, and specific challenges such as of the FSM includes supports baseline targeted data gathering, vulnerability assessments, and it will also promote and establish traditional and climate resilient agriculture, agroforestry systems for different island systems. So the partners that will be implementing the project will include farmer groups, participatory guarantee system groups, Chamber of Commerce, the national and the state departments, policymakers, national and higher education institute, women and youth groups, NGOs, and community members. So the principles and mechanisms will include the project will support establishment of sustainable finance systems for farmers, developing network of licensed or endorsed state farmer associations across the country, introduction of climate resilient species and varieties of already popular local crops, taro, yam, breadfruit, banana, and coconut. And lastly, promotion of traditional farming systems, agroforestry. Wait. Sorry, I'm in the wrong slide. And how is national capacity being developed? Development of institutional coordination mechanism for food security, integrating of climate change and climate smart agriculture into agriculture policy, which will provide meaningful capacity building, development of training curriculum for national and state level stakeholders, improving communications effectiveness between national government, state, and to farmers, as well as relevant stakeholders. Lastly, for the last question, so far this time there has not been any issues since the project is still at its beginning of the just starting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe, for giving us this very good overview of the challenges of doing climate resilient agriculture in a small island developing state context. We've seen a bit of the public sector finance grant using projects so far, and would like now to use the last slot to get a view on the public-private partnerships and the type of private sector-led projects that we will increasingly do more in the future. And for that, I'd like to invite Mr. Tamer El-Raghi to give us a perspective of the Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund. Thank you, Tamer.
Okay. Thanks, Gabriel. I'm Tamer El-Raghi. I'm the Managing Director of the Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund. First of all, I'd like to thank GCF, not only for giving us this opportunity to discuss the work we are doing, but also for being the anchor and the largest investor in our fund. And we'll talk about the crucial role that GCF played in forming our fund. So from the name, we're called the Acumen Resilient Agriculture Fund. So you can tell we're all about agriculture. We're all about investing in agriculture. We're all about resilient agriculture. We're all about climate adaptation of smallholder farmers in Africa. Our investment thesis, you can look at the map, and basically we are a $58 million impact VC fund that's focused on agri. So we invest in agri startups in Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, and Ghana. Usually our ticket size is $300,000 to $4 million. So we are usually part of pre-seed, seed, and Series A. We rarely, I don't recall a situation where we invested alone. Usually we co-invest with other investors, and we invest in business models that help farmers adapt to climate change. We look for business models that are scalable and that are commercially viable. Okay. We are sponsored, you can tell from the name that we are part of the Acumen family. We are sponsored by Acumen. We are managed by Acumen Capital Partners, which is the for-profit arm of Acumen. We're anchored by GCF. And I have to say, without the support of GCF 4 years ago when this whole thing started, we would not have been able to do it. Simply because we were first-time fund manager talking about resilient agriculture, climate adaptation of farmers in Africa. Well, boy, at that time, not many investors were keen about investing in the space. So having GCF as the anchor investor committing a first loss junior equity layer, that helped a lot. That also allowed us to go out in the market and raise more money, raise senior equity. When all said and done, first loss was 23 million from GCF, 2 million from Acumen's philanthropic money. So, and when all said and done, we were able to raise 58. So it tells you that, well, we raised 33 million in senior equity. So far, we're a very young fund. We only had our final close last year. We started deploying capital in 2020. As a result, so far, we invested in 7 companies or 7 startups at different stages with operations in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Nigeria, and Ghana. Our fund is basically an example of blended finance. As I mentioned earlier, we had the first loss layer. We built on that. From GCF, Acumen went to IKEA Foundation, raised the grant for 2 million. That's philanthropic money, allowing Acumen to become an LP in the fund. Okay, raising a total of 25 in first loss. We went out to the market and we raised 33, as I mentioned, from DFIs like FMO and Proparco, from development funds like Soros Economic Development Fund, like the Children Investment Fund, from family offices, 3 family offices in the US and Europe. In addition to that, we have an extra layer of funding, which is the technical assistance facility. And that one, basically, we raised so far $5 million to support our portfolio companies' activities when it comes to business development, measuring impact, and farmers training. I'll talk about that in details. I want you to meet our team. So we are based in Nairobi, except Akugu, she's based in Lagos. Our team, we are 3 Kenyans, a Nigerian, an Egyptian, myself, and an American that has been in Kenya for 10 years. So she's as local as they come. So we are 5 Africans and a local American. So very local team. That's, I'd like you to meet our portfolio. The first company actually resonates with what Benedict mentioned about solar powered irrigation in Namibia. So Sun Culture actually develops and distributes solar powered irrigation systems to smallholder farmers. And I'll talk about that in details. And our portfolio is very diverse, from solar powered irrigation to horticulture like FarmWorks, regenerative agriculture, to tomato jaws in Nigeria, where they grow tomatoes, help farmers grow tomatoes or better tomatoes, more tomatoes, higher yielding tomatoes, and turn that into locally produced tomato paste that's branded and sold in the market. Ozima Chicken and Flow Equity, that's backyard chicken, resilient to drought and diseases.
Countryside, that's dairy, and Farmer Line, which is an active company in Ghana. And we'll talk about a couple of companies and as examples, but it tells you how diverse our portfolio is, geography-wise, and also, because people always ask us what crops we focus on, etc. We are crop agnostic, we are value chain agnostic. We are looking for basically viable, scalable business models that help farmers adapt to climate change and become more resilient. Oops. So sun culture, as I mentioned, solar powered irrigation. As a result of having that system, farmers have more water. When there is a drought, they can grow more crops, they can grow more seasons, and they can leverage more of their land. As a result, farmers have experienced yield in some cases up to 5x in some cases. The average is 2 and change. Some farmers actually, where they have cows, having a pump means more clean water for their cows. And those farmers reported an average of 50% increase in their milk yield. One thing also about sun culture, since we invested only in 2020, and since then the company tripled their sales and impacted close to 100,000 farmers. I'm sorry, 100,000 people, which is equivalent to 20,000 farmers. This picture is not staged, actually. We were just happened to be in the field meeting with farmers, and ironically, it was actually with Lillian from GCF. We were there, we were visiting those farmers of sun culture, and we entered that field, or those two fields, basically. Those are two brothers. The one on the left decided to use solar powered irrigation. The one on the right decided to count on the good old rain. Well, guess what? There was some drought in Kenya earlier this year, and as a result, the one on the right, unfortunately, pretty much didn't get any maize. The one on the right he got enough maize to feel very happy. And usually, farmers who use that system, usually they grow cash crops, and also they use it for their maize as well. So, well, as Lillian put it that day, about this picture, she said, enough said, basically. Uzima Chicken, this is a company that started in Ethiopia under the name of Ethio Chicken. Now they are the largest producer of backyard day-old chicks and feed in Ethiopia. Expanded into Uganda and Rwanda, where we invested in that entity. And now their third entity, Flow Equity, which we invested in as well. They started in Kenya, Ghana, and they've been expanding into Ivory Coast, Mozambique, and Malawi. Again, backyard day-old chick, Sasu breed, which is dual-purpose poultry. So basically, the chicken lays eggs during the year, and at the end of the year, it's sold for the meat. Farmers love it. This company, since we invested, grew more than 2.4x. We invested back in 2020, so growth is, knocking on wood, pretty good. Those farmers, they reported an increase of up to 4x in their income from their backyard chicken. And also what farmers like about it is it provides them with daily source of income instead of seasonal source of income. That's our impact on our portfolio companies. So for every dollar we invested, the companies raised $4.3 in co-financing. Since we invested in portfolio, some companies, since we started in 2020, some this year, companies increased their revenues by 2.7x for the portfolio. Collectively, number of employees increased by 36%. the TA is an extremely powerful tool. We use it only for our portfolio companies, and our portfolio companies, they just love it. And as I mentioned, we use it for 3 or actually 4 activities. The first one is business development. The second one is gender and climate adaptation initiatives, basically farmers training. Third one is lean data, which is measuring our impact. And I'll talk about that in details by a third party, 60 decibels. And the third one is ESG auditing, etc. So far, as I mentioned, we raised $5 million. And again, thanks to GCF, GCF funded half of our TA money. The rest of the TA is funded by FCDO, FMO, IKEA Foundation, and right now we are negotiating another $750,000 with another funder, fingers crossed. So far, even though we only started deploying in 2020, we deployed 20% of the facility. We are typical fund, five investment period, 5 holding period, so it's 10 years, and we are already done with 20%. Why so far we have funded 38 projects, 14 in business development, and that's like business development, let me tell you, companies love it. Why? Because they can hire consultants, they can build systems, they can build ERP systems where otherwise they won't have the cash for, so they love it. That's our fund impact scorecard, and we take impact measurement very seriously, to the extent that as a team, as an investment team, like any fund, we have the financial hurdle rate above which we get our carried interest. That's our financial interest in the fund, or economic interest in the fund. However, we also have an impact threshold. So we are targeting as a fund to impact 2 million farmers. If we impact any less than 1 million, our carried interest goes down actually. Okay, so we do have an impact hurdle rate. So the first thing we measured is how many farmers we impacted, and translate that to how many lives we impacted. And you'll see that the number of males much higher than the number of females. And that was one of the first lessons we learned. In many cases, it's the male that buys the pump, for instance, but it's the female that uses it. So in the company's records, that pump is owned by a male farmer. So it's here counted as a male farmer, but the user is the female. And right now we are tweaking our survey so that, we're working with 60 decibels, so we can capture the actual number of female farmers actually impacted. We run a full survey on farmers' well-being. That's a full lean data survey, about 30 questions that we run on the farmers it used to be every year, it would be every other year. Well, we don't have the money unless, someone in the audience is willing to write us another $1 million check, more than happy to take it. But to be every other year. And basically we look at the impact on their livelihoods, their income. We look at their quality of life. We look at the yield, etc. It's a long questionnaire. This is just a snapshot. Of course, we look at gender. Last but not least, we run a second survey, which is a climate resilience survey. Because when we started, we weren't sure how we're going to measure the impact on climate resilience of farmers. So, and this is work in progress. So please, we welcome feedback on how we measure climate resilience. We are always sharing that annual survey, the outcome, with different stakeholders, asking for feedback. So please. So we measured 3 main things. And again, it's another roughly about 30 questions. That tool was co-developed between us and 60 decibels with the generous support of GCF, of course. We measure 3 things. The first one is a set of questions about their access to enablers. Like, do they have access to information? Do they have access to credit, etc.? The second one, their ability to absorb. If there is a climate shock, do they have the means to absorb that shock? Like, do they have crop insurance? Do they have the financial means to absorb it? Because, as we all know, climate change is affecting the poorest of the poor. And if the climate shock affects their financial abilities and they don't have any savings, then the effect is even more severe. Last but not least, we also survey their ability to adapt. And here we look about practices, regenerative agriculture. We look at tillage. We ask them questions about growing trees, crop rotation, water management, etc. And then we put all of that in the blender where we get that scorecard. And as a result, so far, only about 40% of farmers in our portfolio are resilient to climate change. The rest are vulnerable. That is bad, ladies and gentlemen. So we are hoping that working with our portfolio companies, that improves. We are tracking that year on year. The first year, they were a bit less than 40%. Following year was a little bit more than 40%, still within the statistical error, we should say. So we are hoping that by the end of the lifetime of our fund, we see significant improvement. Thank you, and thanks for your time. And if you have any questions, more than happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamer. I think that was very inspiring, and I think it's going to trigger a lot of questions. But given that we have about 19 minutes left, instead of doing a Q&A right after the presentation, I'd like to invite my colleague Mark to give us a quick overview of some of the emerging priorities that we are considering for GCF2. And after that, we'll have a consolidated Q&A session in which we can address the questions. We can address questions to the panelists and also to the Secretariat in terms of our future work in food and agriculture. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, and good evening, dear colleagues. I'll try to be very brief, as I'm sure you have a long list of questions. All right, excellent. So let me see if I get this thing to work properly. There we go. Sorry, can you on you? All right. Yeah. Oops. There we. Okay. 1, 2. All right, excellent. Sorry, I'll go straight to the first slide there. So what I'm about to tell you is 4 key priorities that we are looking into be fully developed by GCF2. This is to say that we are not deprioritizing anything else in the sector, of course. Number 1 is country priorities and country needs. These are just 4 emerging ideas that we look forward to work with you all on shaping and finalizing as we go forward. So you will see some different ideas and suggestions listed here. The first 2 ones are related to what Gabriel mentioned earlier about the global methane pledge. They really look at how can we reduce methane emissions in key farming systems, such as the livestock sector and the rice sector, which I'll come to in a minute. Number 1 here on livestock, it's no secret that livestock production contributes to a significant amount of GHG emissions annually. In particular, methane emissions from enteric fermentation, as you see listed here. The data, the science is already there, so not to repeat what is out there, but basically highlighting that there is a need to act and there's a lot of opportunity to tackle this challenge in different ways. We have noticed and observed and analyzed that in our pipeline and portfolio, we have very few projects or programs that look at this challenge 100%. So therefore, we would really like to see going forward, how can we come up with some very innovative solutions, heavily also building in private sector engagement. So what could that look like? These are some suggestions here. We would like to see several larger cross-cutting projects or programs being both mitigation and adaptation. So we want to increase resilience for smallholders, but at the same time, also, of course, reduce the emissions, as the sector both acts as safety nets for millions of rural poor farmers. So it's important to have both. So one way to do this could be to look at the geographical sector or distribution here. We could also look at the different types of livestock systems, of course, across the regions. And key approaches to focus on here would really be the different systems to reduce emissions. And number 1 would be the improved feed as a good place to start, obviously. Of course, there's some productivity gains you see here listed through better breeding, better animal husbandry, manure management, energy integration and recycling. We saw some excellent examples from Namibia, about how to do that. So that's a great example right there. And what would be important here is to really be sure that we monitor the emission reductions to make sure that we can have a very clear and very well presented rationale on that. Continuing with methane, but moving to the rice-based farming systems. So the estimated emissions from paddy rice, irrigated rice, is around 1.5%, as you see listed here, mainly in very water-intensive systems where the flooding leads to methane emissions. There is currently in our pipeline portfolio very few projects that really tackle this at a larger scale, and therefore we are very much interested to see how we can tackle this across the key rice farming areas in the world, across all different levels. And again here, this is a cross-cutting, so it will both be to reduce emissions, particular methane in this case, but at the same time increase the resilience of the farming communities that are engaged in rice systems. This could look at better use of water. I mean, improve water management. we could, for example, look at some of the different productivity gains. There are many proven, well-documented methods out there, such as rice, a system of rice intensification, alternative wetting and drying, and many more, where, rice fish and so forth, many out there, not to mention all of them, but to look at what fits best in what context. How can we, for example, also look at straw recycling, different opportunities for that, weather insurance and so on. And again, to really monitor the emission reductions. And I have 2 minutes left, so that's perfect. There are 2 slides left, so 1 per slide. So very quickly, food loss and waste is another key priority that we are very interested in really pushing forward. Food loss and waste contributes approximately to 10% of the global GHG emissions, probably more because it's underreported in many cases. We don't simply have the data on that yet. The science is there, however, saying how important it is, of course, what interventions can be done across the food supply chain in different countries and different contexts. The NDCs highlight quite a lot of key priorities that can be tackled already and turned into project ideas. What we would like to do is to really see how larger country programs, multi-country or projects or programs could look at the different interventions across the food supply chain. That could start with from the farm, what can happen on the farm to reduce food loss, and later at the consumption level, how can we look at what can be done to reduce food waste, and then everything in between. There are many different ways to do that, of course. What we're really keen to see here is also the role of private sector and the circular economy aspect coming into this. And of course, to really capture those emission reductions and the increased resilience. And the last minutes on this last slide, but without doing all that really comes back to one thing. It comes back to what kind of diet are we trying to promote or to meet in any given context. If we change the diet, then everything else will change to meet that demand of that diet in that particular context. So promoting more balanced and sustainable diets can impact all the other things that I talked about. And there are key opportunities to promote better and more sustainable diets in different places that can really benefit the populations, the economies, and make better use of that land available and free up more productive lands for other purposes. So what we're interested to see here, for example, would be how we can use different technologies to really scale up this way to better promote different diets or different alternatives to existing diets. Again, looking at adaptation needs, of course, but also mitigation here. With that, dear colleagues, I thank you very much and look very much forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. A lot of information in 4 minutes and a half. We are left with a bit of time, but I think we'd like to dedicate this time to questions from you and ideas and things that you'd like to share with the audience. So I open the floor for questions directly addressing the presentations of our panelists, our programmatic priorities, our way of doing business, or any other ideas on how we can better achieve impact and build resilience and increase productivity in a sustainable way in the agriculture and food security space. And I expected that the audience will be shy. So fortunately, we have the Huva app where there are already 2 questions. Let me pick up my phone. The first one is for Benedict. And the question is, what strategy is applied to maintain the sustainability of the climate smart equipment and facilities provided by your project?
Yes, thank you. It's extremely good questions because most of the recipients of these equipment don't have the skills to maintain them, to operate them, and they are located, in remote areas. So what we've done so far is that where there is, let me say, a hydroponic system for fodder production, we add a commercial element to it, and we help the communities to identify a technical partner to help to assist with the operationalization of that facility. And from the post-recovery that is received from the commercial part is used to sustain the project. or the equipment, as well as feed into the income generating facility of the communities. Generally, that's how it's set up. When it comes to equipment such as solar water pumping systems, that is fairly, simple and direct. Communities, they are trained on how to take care of the solar systems and pumping systems, so they can do that on their own. But when it comes to greenhouses and so forth, we partner them with technical partners, ensuring them that the agreement that are signed favors the communities as the ultimate beneficiaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benedict. There is a second question, which I think I'll pass it over to Mark. It's regarding whether we've had any projects so far that are targeting climate resilient fisheries and food security, as there seems to be a lot of focus on crops and livestock. And I'll give a heads up to Tamer as well to tell us whether in his pipeline of projects there are any initiatives that are looking at aquaculture. Over to you, Mark. Mark, I think it's on. Try it.
Oh, yes. I seem to have some problems with technology today. Thank you. Excellent question. So we have to start with very, very few projects that target that as their key focus. We actually have one that came through very recently at B33, which is for Gambia, which a larger part of that project is focusing on different aquaculture packages being introduced to diversify the livelihoods and the farming systems on site. And that's one of the first ones I would say that we have seen where aquaculture is taking such a key role. And we would be very, of course, keen to see more use of aquaculture in projects in these very innovative ways to meet food security and diversify livelihoods. Thank you.
Well, right, so far what we see in East Africa is aquaculture is driven by larger companies who have commercial operations on Lake Victoria, for instance. West Africa is a little different. In Nigeria, we see a lot of ponds, especially for catfish. Tilapia is catching up. What we are keeping an eye on a couple of startups that are getting into the space where they're working with smaller farmers, and that's the focus of our fund. We do not invest in commercial like companies that do not work with farmers. It has to be working with farmers. And what we believe in is that there is an opportunity, especially in East Africa, for tilapia to do what tilapia did to the Egyptian ecosystem, where 30 years ago, tilapia was just mainly wild catch. Today, it's the #1 source of protein. More than about 50% of animal protein consumed in Egypt is tilapia, and it's all ponds. It's all done by smallholder farmers. And we believe that there is room for similar model in East Africa because of the weather. Well, it's called Nile tilapia anyway, and it started all in Lake Victoria. So we believe that there is an opportunity there. We are keeping an eye on a couple of startups, but still very early, but the potential is massive.
Thank you very much to both of you. Before I was trying to check the temperature of the room, and we have a question over there. If Naima, you would, there's a closer microphone. Thank you. And if you don't mind introducing yourself before posing the question,
okay.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Maya Tkaraza from Georgia. I have a question to Mark. I took the picture regarding your presentation. Sorry. It's really interesting to have that you mentioned to have the priority on the livestock and methane reduction. And I wanted to ask you on that because from Georgia, previously we had a try to have readiness to assess the potential of the emission reduction from the livestock. And we have received like very strong resistance from the GCO. So it was kind of surprising at some points. But I was wondering whether, though this is now, you mentioned as a priority, will be there, or would you consider to have some kind of limitations or, I don't know how to say the criteria, but something that's within the livestock GCF would still resist to fund? Because we were told that the only version of the livestock project that GCF could finance is the reduction of the numbers of the livestock, while usually the discussion is about the increasing, but on the sustainable way to reduce the methane emissions. So how would you see the development of this sector or the projects within this part? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maya. That's a great question. So I'm not too familiar with the details of that project, but a quick reaction is basically, as highlighted on the slide, if the rationale and the narrative is clear on how the livestock sector can be made more sustainable and how we can reduce emissions from the sector in different ways, using different approaches as mentioned, then in principle, then that would be a very good starting place to then build a project or a program based on that strong argument and well-presented case. It's true, like you mentioned, in some cases, it's a number of heads reduced, but there are many other ways we are seeing now how you can really make that sector more sustainable. So I wouldn't go as far as saying we have a no-go zone yet. Of course, there are some areas that may be more challenging to operate in. But it probably is worth to have a follow-up discussion on this afterwards, and we can sit down and see how we can sort it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I'll chip in for 10 seconds there on the same question. I think what's important when we develop a livestock project is now to look at what would be the emission profile if it's business as usual, and try to define the rationale for the investment vis-a-vis that business as usual scenario, saying that we will not necessarily reach a net zero in terms of emissions in the sector. We will not necessarily reduce the number of animals, but we will improve the situation vis-a-vis what would have happened without the investment. Thank you. We have one question there at the back, and I see the gentleman here at the front as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the informative presentation. My question is the old lady sitting there for the state of Micronesia. You said that you want to sustain your project. Sustainability of project is very important. And one of the mechanisms you presented that to sustain the project after the phasing out of the project, you said that the establishment of finance system to the farmers. So the in Sudan also we face your challenge like how to mobilize farmers in organized structure. It is very important so as to sustain this financial system. And we have also the weather extremes and the traditional ownership of the land and so on. So I think also if you within your project component something like matching grant for revolving fund, so as to ensure that these funds should be allocated for other activities when these small grants done by the farmers. Also, I believe that within the development of the project, the project itself, it should be developed a clear exit strategy so as to hand over their activities to the implementing entities. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Joe. On the question of financial instruments, you've mentioned the partial guarantee system and on exit strategy.
Thank you for the question. So the participatory guarantee system, we're trying to ensure that all of the farmers are part of a BGS group, and then to make sure that they contribute when they sell their products, they can contribute to their system or their BGS group, and to ensure the sustainability of their farming activities. Did that answer the question?
Thank you very much. We're at the end of the session, but I'd like to give the opportunity to the gentleman here to ask his question if the audience allows an extra 2 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, it should be very quick. Hi, my name is Edgar Salinas with CAF Development Bank of Latin America. Thank you for this side event. We have a particular interest in agriculture. We are here together with the NTA of Colombia in the process of a negotiation of an FAA with Grace. Hopefully, I'll have the chance to meet her. Not sure if she's in the room. And this morning, we participated with the communications team of the Secretariat, and this idea of a community of knowledge was repeatedly mentioned. And there is something today that Tamer said that got my attention when you were speaking of the composite indicator, where you assess the resilience of the different assets. I think that ties with, let's say, recommendations from the TCFD in terms of a physical risk. And that's a very interesting point because it helps building the business case. So my question is whether at the moment that is something that you are doing or kind of on a test phase, qualitative data, or whether it's on the radar so you can actually build a correlation between, let's say, that composite indicator of resilience of the asset versus, let's say, a potential loss or default. And that message is also for your team. I think the more we get data on that, it helps other FAPs to build the case depending on the type of products that we're dealing with. And for us in CAF, for type of VC funds, it would be of interest to have that kind of information. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Tamer, because I know how excited you are about the way you measure impact.
Yeah, and actually, it's a great point. And there are two things that we're working on right now with 60 decibels. The first one is because they run those surveys on different companies, not only our own. And we are in the process of allowing them to use the survey that we developed for others because we want this to be public good, okay, for others to use, so that we can also compare the performance of our farmers compared to farmers of other companies in the ag space, not only in Africa, but other parts of the world. Also, we want to compare that to the economic performance, because if a company is doing really great on the climate resilience, and then they end up going belly up in 2 years, then the sustainability of the farmers is not there, because we want to tie the sustainability of the farmer to the sustainability of the business model. So these are two initiatives that we are working on right now. We don't have much data yet, to be honest. And as I said, we're really welcoming feedback on what we are measuring, because it is just, this is the first iteration. And we are sure it's far from being perfect. As a matter of fact, just for the second iteration, we learned something that's very important. When we ask farmers about having access to finance, those who buy solar powered irrigation, finance solar powered irrigation systems, the answer is no. The answer, no, they don't have access to finance. Why? That was an aha moment. In their minds, access to finance means access to credit, meaning loans. They don't think of buying over 30 months that there is a financing component. So these are the kind of things we are learning, but again, very open to feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamer. There are a number of questions on Huva, and I'm sure there are additional questions from the audience, but unfortunately we ran out of time. But we'll be available to network, discuss, and answer some of the questions over the coming coffee break. Please join me in thanking the panelists one more time for their interventions. And thank you very much for joining this session. For us in the agriculture and food security team, it's just the beginning of hopefully a longer term conversation. And we are very keen, the three of us, to get engaged as early as possible in the origination cycle of ideas. So throughout these days here in Korea and in the next weeks and months, please do not hesitate to reach out to us with any ideas that you have on your agriculture and food security portfolios, and would be happy to assist you with. Thank you very much once again, and enjoy the rest of the day.